You know, at 78 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal this world could throw at me. I buried 2 husbands, raised 4 ungrateful children, and survived more heartbreak than any woman should. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what my own flesh and blood would do to me in the winter of 2019. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson, but everyone calls me Dot. I've lived in the same house in Spokane, Washington, for 43 years. Built it with my second husband, Frank, back when lumber was cheap and dreams were bigger than our bank accounts. Frank passed in 2015. Lung cancer took him faster than a prairie fire. And suddenly I was alone with our little empire. The house, 3 rental properties, and nearly $200,000 we'd saved penny by penny. That's when my nephew Bradley came knocking. I should have known something was wrong when he started showing up every Sunday after church. Bradley, my sister Ruth's boy, hadn't darkened my doorstep in 15 years. Not since he borrowed $500 for car repairs and disappeared like smoke. But there he was, 38 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, talking about investment opportunities and how he wanted to take care of his favorite aunt. Favorite aunt. Lord, how those words made my old heart flutter. You see, Ruth died 3 years ago, and Bradley was all I had left of my family. My own children lived scattered across the country, too busy with their important lives to call their mother more than twice a year. So when this handsome, successful man, my own blood, started paying attention to me and started treating me like I mattered, I ate it up like a starving woman at a church potluck. Aunt Dot, he'd say, settling into Frank's old recliner like he belonged there. You're sitting on a gold mine, but your money isn't working for you. Inflation is eating away at your savings every single day. He had charts, papers, and official-looking documents. He talked about cryptocurrency, real estate flips, and something called foreign exchange trading that could double my money in 6 months. The way he explained it, I'd be a fool not to invest. But Bradley, I'd say, I don't understand all this computer business. Frank always handled our investments, and he kept things simple. That's exactly the problem, Aunt Dot. Uncle Frank was a good man, but he was old school. The world has changed. Money doesn't grow in savings accounts anymore. It dies there. He showed me pictures of his house in Seattle, a mansion really, with views of the water and more bedrooms than a person would know what to do with. He drove a BMW that probably cost more than Frank and I spent on our first house, and he claimed it all came from the same investment strategy he wanted to share with me. I'm not asking for your life savings, he'd say, leaning forward with those earnest brown eyes that reminded me so much of Ruth. Just $50,000 to start. Let's see what it can do in 3 months. If you're not completely satisfied, I'll personally guarantee to return every penny. $50,000. It might as well have been $50 million to someone who grew up during the Depression, who remembered when a nickel could buy a candy bar and a quarter filled your gas tank. But Bradley made it sound like pocket change, like the smart move any reasonable person would make. The worst part? I wanted to believe him. Not because I was greedy. I had more money than I'd ever need. I wanted to believe him because he made me feel important and valuable, like I still had something to contribute to this world instead of just waiting around to die. So on a gray Tuesday morning in February, I went to First National Bank and withdrew $50,000 cash. The teller, a sweet girl named Jennifer, who'd been handling my accounts for years, looked at me with concern. Mrs. Henderson, are you sure about this? This is an awful lot of cash. If you're making a major purchase, we could arrange a cashier's check or wire transfer. It's fine, honey, I told her, my hands shaking as I signed the withdrawal slip. It's for my nephew. Family business. Bradley was waiting in the parking lot, engine running. When I handed him that envelope full of hundreds, he kissed my cheek and promised to call me every week with updates. That was 6 months ago. I haven't heard from him since, but losing the money wasn't the worst part. Not even close. 3 weeks after I gave Bradley that first $50,000, he called me from what sounded like a busy restaurant. I could hear laughter and clinking glasses in the background. "Aunt Dot, you're not going to believe this." His voice was electric with excitement. "Your investment is already up 18%. In 3 weeks. I told you this was going to work. 18%. I did the math in my head. That was $9,000. More than I used to make in a year when I was working at the dime store. Now here's where it gets interesting," Bradley continued. "I've got an opportunity to get you into something even better. A commercial real estate deal in Portland. But we need to move fast, like this week fast. The other investors are putting in serious money." Other investors? That made it sound legitimate, like I was part of some exclusive club instead of a lonely old woman being played for a fool. "How much are we talking about, Bradley?" "Another 50,000 would get you a decent position. But Aunt Dot, if you could do 100,000, you'd be looking at returns that would set you up for life. We're talking about potentially tripling your money in a year. $100,000. That was more than Frank made in his last 3 years before retirement. But if Bradley was right, if this investment really paid off like he said, I'd have enough money to travel, to finally see Europe like I'd always dreamed. Maybe even enough to convince my children to visit more often. I don't know, Bradley. That's an awful lot of money. I understand your hesitation. I really do. But Aunt Dot, you're 78 years old. Forgive me for being blunt, but how much longer are you going to let fear hold you back? This could be your last chance to really live. Your last chance to really live. Those words hit me like a slap across the face. Because he was right, wasn't he? I was 78. My best years were behind me. My own children barely acknowledged my existence. Frank was gone. Ruth was gone. What was I saving money for? The nursing home? "There's something else," Bradley said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I wasn't going to tell you this because I didn't want you to feel pressured, but I'm putting my own money into this deal. 200,000. Everything I've got is liquid, his own money. If Bradley was willing to risk everything, if he believed in this investment so strongly that he'd bet his own future on it, how could I not trust him?" "Okay," I heard myself saying, 100,000. But Bradley, I want some kind of documentation. Papers showing what we're investing in." "Absolutely. I'll bring everything by this weekend. You're making the right choice, Aunt Dot. I promise you won't regret this." But something felt different about Bradley when he came to pick up the second check. He was distracted and kept checking his phone. And when I asked to see the investment documents, he patted his briefcase and said he'd forgotten them at the office. "Don't worry about the paperwork right now," he said, standing to leave almost as soon as I handed him the check. "I'll email everything to you next week. The important thing is getting your money into this deal before the window closes." After he left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the checkbook. $150,000, 3/4 of everything Frank and I had worked our entire lives to save. But Bradley had promised to triple it. Even if he only doubled it, I'd be better off than before. I tried calling him the next day to ask about those documents. His phone went straight to voicemail. The day after that, same thing. By the end of the week, I was starting to feel a cold knot forming in my stomach. That's when he called with news about the emergency opportunity. "Aunt Dot, I need you to listen carefully," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "There's been a development with the Portland deal. The main investor pulled out at the last minute, which means there's a bigger piece of the pie available. But we need to act immediately, like today, or the whole thing falls apart." "Bradley, slow down. I haven't even seen the paperwork from the last investment yet. I know. My assistant is working on getting everything organized. But Aunt Dot, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The kind of deal that comes around maybe once every 20 years. If we can put in another 100,000 today, we'll essentially own the entire development. Another 100,000. That would be almost everything I had left. I don't think I can do that, Bradley. That's nearly all my savings, which is exactly why this makes sense. Instead of that money sitting in the bank earning practically nothing, it could be working for you. Aunt Dot, I'm going to be straight with you. I've never seen returns like what this deal is promising. Never. You could be looking at 7 figures within 18 months. 7 figures. $1 million. I tried to imagine what that kind of money would mean. I could buy a condo in Florida, maybe one of those nice places with a view of the ocean. I could hire someone to clean my house, tend my garden, and maybe even cook my meals. I could stop worrying about whether my old car would make it through another winter and stop calculating every grocery purchase. But what if something goes wrong? I asked. That's why I'm putting in another $300,000 of my own money, Bradley said. Aunt Dot, would I risk my own future if I wasn't absolutely certain this was going to work? You're not just my aunt. You're the only family I have left. I'd never forgive myself if I steered you wrong. The only family I have left. Just like he was mine. Okay, I whispered. One more time. But Bradley, after this, I need to see everything. All the paperwork, all the documentation. I need to understand exactly what we're investing in. Of course. Absolutely. Once this deal closes, I'll bring you every document, every contract. You'll see exactly how we're going to make you rich. Rich. At 78 years old, I was finally going to be rich. I should have known it was too good to be true. The last time I saw Bradley Henderson, he was standing in my kitchen on a Thursday afternoon in April, wearing jeans and a wrinkled shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. Gone was the confident businessman who'd been visiting me for months. This person looked desperate, cornered, like a wild animal with nowhere to run. I need $20,000, he said without even saying hello. No kiss on the cheek, no asking about my health, and no pretense of caring about anything other than my money. I was standing at my sink, washing the lunch dishes, when he let himself in through the back door like he owned the place. The sight of him made my heart skip, not with joy, but with something that felt dangerously close to fear. Bradley, I said, turning around with a dish towel still in my hands. You haven't called me in 3 weeks. I've been worried sick. What's happening with our investments? He started pacing my kitchen like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair over and over. There's been a complication. A legal thing. The lawyers need more money to sort it out, and they need it today. What kind of legal thing? What lawyers? Bradley, you're scaring me. It's nothing for you to worry about, Aunt Dot. Just some bureaucratic nonsense. But if we don't handle this today, we could lose everything we've invested so far. Everything we've invested so far. $250,000 of my money. Money that was supposed to be tripling, making me rich and setting me up for the rest of my life. I want to see the papers, Bradley. All of them. Every investment, every contract, every document you promised to show me months ago. He stopped, pacing, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, panic mixed with something that might have been guilt. The papers are all tied up with the lawyers right now. That's part of the problem. But Aunt Dot, $20,000 fixes this. $20,000 and then we're golden. Everything we've worked for, everything we've invested, it'll all pay off exactly like I promised. Worked for? The words came out sharper than I intended. Bradley, I gave you my money. You haven't worked for anything. That's when I saw it. A flash of anger across his face, quickly covered but unmistakable. For just a moment, my nephew looked at me like I was an obstacle instead of a person, like I was something standing between him and what he wanted. Look, he said, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, cold and impatient. I don't have time for this conversation. This deal needs to close today, or we lose everything. Not just the profits, everything. Every penny you invested. Gone. Gone? My legs suddenly felt weak, and I had to grab the counter to steady myself. What do you mean, gone? I mean exactly what I said. The whole deal collapses if we don't cover this legal fee today. Your $250,000 disappears. Is that what you want? $250,000. Hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. That was everything Frank and I had saved. Our entire life's work reduced to ammunition in whatever game Bradley was playing. How is that possible? I asked. You said the money was safe. You said even if the investments didn't perform as well as expected, I'd get my principal back. You guaranteed it. Bradley laughed, but there was no humor in it. Aunt Dot, there are no guarantees in investments. I thought you understood that. This is business, not a savings account. But you said you were putting in your own money. You said you'd never risk my future. I did put in my own money, and I'm risking my future. That's why I need you to help me fix this. Something in his voice, the desperation, the barely controlled panic, made a terrible thought creep into my mind. Bradley, I said quietly, is there actually an investment? Are there really other investors, lawyers, and a Portland real estate deal? The silence that followed lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. I watched Bradley's face cycle through a dozen expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. Of course there's an investment, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Do you think I'd lie to you? Do you think I'd risk everything on some made-up scheme? But as he said it, he couldn't look at me, and that's when I knew. Oh my God, I whispered. There is no investment, is there? There never was. Aunt Dot, where's my money, Bradley? Where's my $250,000? He collapsed into one of my kitchen chairs like his strings had been cut. For a long moment, he just sat there with his head in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red and watery. It's complicated, he said. No, it's not. It's simple. Where is my money? I can get it back. All of it, plus the returns I promised. But I need more time, and I need this $20,000 to buy that time. You spent it. I wasn't asking a question anymore. You spent my life savings, borrowed it. I borrowed it for a short-term opportunity that didn't work out the way I expected. But Aunt Dot, I swear to you I can make this right. I just need... Get out. The words came from somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I didn't even know existed. Get out of my house. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You stole from me, your own family, the only person who believed in you, who trusted you, who loved you. You stole everything Frank and I worked 40 years to save. Bradley stood up, his desperation replaced by something uglier. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yeah, I spent your money. I had debts, bad investments of my own, and people who were going to hurt me if I didn't pay up. I figured I'd borrow from you temporarily, make some quick returns, pay you back with interest, and everybody wins. Borrow? I felt something hot and dangerous rising in my chest. You call lying to me borrowing? I call it surviving, he shouted. You think I wanted to con my own aunt? You think I enjoyed listening to you talk about how proud you were of me, how successful I was? You have no idea what kind of pressure I was under. What would have happened if I hadn't found that money somewhere? So you decided to destroy my life to save yours. You're 78 years old. How much longer were you going to live anyway? What were you going to do with all that money? Take it with you to the grave? The cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't my nephew anymore. This wasn't Ruth's sweet boy who used to help me in the garden when he was small. This was a stranger, a predator who had been studying me for months, learning my weaknesses and figuring out exactly how to manipulate me. Get out, I said again, my voice steadier now. Get out and don't ever come back. Aunt Dot, please, if you're not out of this house in 60 seconds, I'm calling the police. He left, but not before grabbing my purse from the counter and taking what little cash I had left, maybe $80. Even then, even after confessing what he'd done, he couldn't resist stealing from me one more time. I stood in my empty kitchen for a long time after he left, staring at the chair where he'd sat, trying to process what had just happened. Everything was gone. Not just the money, but my sense of security, my trust in family, and my belief that people were fundamentally good. At 78 years old, I was starting over with nothing, but I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The morning after Bradley left, I did something I hadn't done since Frank died. I got dressed up for battle. I put on my best navy suit, the one I wore to Ruth's funeral, and my good leather shoes that pinched my feet but made me feel taller and stronger. I braided my silver hair into a tight bun and applied lipstick with the precision of a woman who refused to be seen as a victim. If I was going to fight for what was left of my life, I was going to do it with dignity. My first stop was the Spokane Police Department. Detective Maria Santos was younger than my youngest child, with kind eyes and calloused hands that told me she'd worked hard to get where she was. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in a small notebook while I explained how my nephew had systematically emptied my life savings. "Mrs. Henderson," she said gently when I finished, "I want you to know that what happened to you is unfortunately very common. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, and family members are responsible for more than half of these cases." "Can you arrest him?" I asked. "That's where it gets complicated. Did your nephew forge your signature on any documents?" "No, I wrote the checks myself." "Did he physically threaten you or coerce you in any way?" "No, he lied, but he didn't threaten me." Detective Santos set down her pen and looked at me with sympathy. "Mrs. Henderson, what your nephew did was morally reprehensible, but proving it was legally criminal is going to be very difficult. He convinced you to give him money based on promises about investments that didn't exist. That could be fraud, but he could claim he genuinely believed the investments would work out, or that circumstances beyond his control caused them to fail." I felt the hope I'd been carrying deflate like a punctured balloon. "So there's nothing you can do?" "We can open an investigation. We can interview him and see if he admits to intentional fraud. But Mrs. Henderson, I want to be honest with you. Getting your money back through the criminal justice system is going to be a long shot." "Then what are my options?" "Civil court. You could sue him for the return of your money. That has a much lower burden of proof than criminal prosecution." I thanked Detective Santos and left the police station feeling more alone than I'd felt since Frank's funeral. Civil court meant lawyers, and lawyers meant money I didn't have. I was trapped in a system that seemed designed to protect the predators and abandon the prey. My next stop was Bradley's house in Seattle. The drive took me 4 hours in my old Toyota, and by the time I reached his neighborhood, I understood why he'd needed my money so desperately. His house wasn't a mansion. It was a modest 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The BMW he'd been so proud of was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a beat-up Honda with a dented front bumper. I rang the doorbell 6 times before he answered. "Aunt Dot?" He looked genuinely shocked to see me. "What are you doing here?" "I want my money back." "Look, I told you I'm working on it. These things take time." "No." I pushed past him into his living room, which was furnished with the kind of cheap furniture you see in college apartments. "I want my money back now, all of it." "I don't have it." "Then we're going to figure out how to get it." For the next 3 hours, I made Bradley walk me through every lie he'd told me, every fake investment, and every promise he'd made. It was like performing surgery on my own heart, cutting away every moment of trust and affection to expose the calculated deception underneath. He'd never had a successful investment portfolio. The BMW had been leased and repossessed 2 months ago. His house in the suburbs was actually his ex-girlfriend's place, where he'd been crashing on and off for 6 months. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck as a used car salesman until he got fired for fudging paperwork. "So, where did my money go?" I asked. "Gambling debts, mostly. Some credit cards. There was this opportunity in Vegas that was supposed to be a sure thing. You gambled away my life savings?" "I was trying to multiply it." "If it had worked out, you would have gotten everything back plus more. You would have thanked me." I stared at this person who shared my blood, who I'd held as a baby, and who I'd loved unconditionally for 38 years. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" It's not as bad as you think. You still have the house, right? And Social Security. People live on less. I trusted you." The words came out as a whisper. "You were the only family I had left who cared about me, and I trusted you completely." For the first time since this nightmare began, Bradley looked ashamed. "I'm sorry, Aunt Dot, I really am. If I could undo it all, I would. But you can't. And sorry doesn't pay my bills or fix what you broke." I left his apartment that evening with nothing but the knowledge of how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. The drive back to Spokane was the longest 4 hours of my life, filled with self-recrimination and a crushing sense of hopelessness. But when I pulled into my driveway and saw my little house, the house Frank and I had built together, the house where I'd raised my children and buried my dreams, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Anger, not sadness, not self-pity, not regret. Pure, clean anger that burned away everything weak and left only what was strong. I was 78 years old, broke, and alone. But I was still Dorothy Mae Henderson, daughter of a Depression-era farmer who'd taught me that the only thing worse than failing was giving up. Frank was gone, and my children didn't care, and my nephew had stolen everything I'd worked for, but I wasn't dead yet. And as long as I was breathing, I was going to fight. The letter came on a Tuesday morning in June, 3 months after Bradley had disappeared from my life like the coward he was. It was from a law firm in Seattle, written in the kind of language designed to intimidate people like me who never went to college. "Dear Mrs. Henderson," it began, "our client, Mr. Bradley Henderson, has asked us to contact you regarding your recent harassment and threats. Mr. Henderson is willing to seek a peaceful resolution to your dispute, but continued contact of the nature you have engaged in constitutes stalking under Washington state law, harassment, threats, stalking. Had to read the letter 3 times before I understood what was happening. Bradley, the man who had stolen $250,000 from his own aunt, was trying to make me the criminal. I called the number at the bottom of the letterhead and asked to speak to the lawyer who'd signed it. A man named Richard Polk. "Mrs. Henderson," he said when he finally came to the phone, "I understand you've been under a great deal of stress, but showing up at my client's residence unannounced and making demands is not an appropriate way to resolve this matter." "Mr. Polk," I said, "did your client tell you that he stole my life savings by pretending to invest it?" "My client denies any wrongdoing. He maintains that you gave him money for legitimate investment purposes and that market forces beyond his control resulted in losses." Market forces? I felt that familiar anger rising in my chest. "There was no market, Mr. Polk. There were no investments. He gambled away my money in Las Vegas. That's not my understanding of the situation. Mrs. Henderson, but regardless of your perspective on the financial arrangements between you and my client, your behavior since then has crossed the line into harassment. I visited him once, and you made threats during that visit. I threatened to call the police if he didn't return my money. That's not harassment. That's justice. Mrs. Henderson, I'm calling as a courtesy to let you know that any further contact with my client will result in us filing for a restraining order. I strongly advise you to seek legal counsel of your own. Legal counsel. Like I could afford a lawyer when I barely had enough money left for groceries. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that letter. This was how the world worked, wasn't it? The person who steals gets a lawyer to protect him from the person who was robbed. The system that was supposed to provide justice instead provided cover for the criminals. But then I remembered something Frank used to say, "Dot, if you can't fight them with money, fight them with time." Rich folks have money, but working folks have time. I might not have been able to afford Richard Polk, but I could afford a library card. I spent the next 2 weeks at the Spokane Public Library, learning everything I could about elder financial abuse. Civil litigation and small claims court. I discovered that while my chances of getting my money back were slim, there were other ways to fight back. The first thing I did was file a complaint with the Washington State Attorney General's office. They couldn't recover my money, but they could investigate Bradley for running fraudulent investment schemes and potentially prevent him from doing this to other people. The second thing I did was contact every news station in Seattle and Spokane. Most ignored me, but KXLY-TV had a consumer protection segment called Getting Results, and they were interested in my story. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, came to my house on a Thursday afternoon with a cameraman and a list of questions. I told her everything, the lies, the fake investments, and the systematic way Bradley had built my trust before destroying it. "Mrs. Henderson," Jessica said, "are you comfortable going on television with this story? It means your name and face will be public, and your nephew will probably see it." "Good," I said. "I want him to see it. I want everyone to see what he did." The story aired on a Friday night. Within an hour, my phone was ringing with calls from other elderly people who'd been scammed by people they trusted, family members, financial advisors, supposed friends who'd convinced them to hand over their life savings. But the call that mattered most came on Saturday morning. "Is this Dorothy Henderson?" The voice was female, middle-aged, professional. "Yes, it is. My name is Karen Martinez. I'm an attorney who specializes in elder law and financial abuse cases. I saw your story on the news last night, and I'd like to help you." "Ma'am, I appreciate that, but I can't afford a lawyer." "Mrs. Henderson, I work on contingency for cases like yours. That means I don't get paid unless we recover money for you. Would you be willing to meet with me?" Karen Martinez was everything Bradley pretended to be: successful, confident, and middle-aged, and genuinely concerned about my welfare. Her office was in downtown Spokane, filled with diplomas and awards and photos of elderly clients she'd helped over the years. "Mrs. Henderson," she said after reviewing all my documents, "you have a very strong case for civil fraud. Your nephew made specific promises about investments that he knew didn't exist. He took your money under false pretenses with the intent to deprive you of it permanently. That's textbook fraud. But the police said it would be hard to prove. Criminal fraud and civil fraud have different standards of proof. In civil court, we only have to show that it's more likely than not that he committed fraud. Given the evidence you've collected, I think we can do that." "How long will it take?" "Probably 18 months to 2 years, assuming he doesn't settle out of court. And Mrs. Henderson, I need to be honest with you. Even if we win, collecting the judgment could be difficult. If he doesn't have assets, we might not be able to recover anything." "Then why would you take the case?" Karen smiled. "Because sometimes the fight is worth having, even when you know you might not win. And because your story could prevent this from happening to other people." For the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Leave the legal work to me. But Mrs. Henderson, I want you to prepare yourself for a long battle. Your nephew isn't going to give up without a fight, and his lawyers are going to try to make this as difficult as possible for you." "Let them try," I said. "I've got nothing but time now, and I'm too old to be scared of lawyers." Karen laughed. "Mrs. Henderson, I think your nephew picked the wrong woman to mess with. She was right about that. Bradley might have taken my money, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd left me alive, angry, and with nothing left to lose. That's a dangerous combination in a 78-year-old woman who's tired of being pushed around." The lawsuit we filed against Bradley was 37 pages long and detailed every lie, every false promise, and every moment of calculated manipulation he'd used to steal my money. Karen Martinez wrote it in language so clear and devastating that even I could understand every charge we were bringing against him. But Bradley's lawyers fought back harder than I'd expected. First, they tried to get the case dismissed, claiming that I'd given Bradley the money as gifts, not investments. When that failed, they filed a countersuit against me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming that my television interview had damaged Bradley's reputation and caused him psychological harm. They're trying to intimidate you into dropping the lawsuit, Karen explained during one of our monthly meetings. This is a common tactic when defendants don't have a strong case on the merits. Can they do that? Sue me for telling the truth about what he did? They can file the paperwork, but they won't win. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. But Mrs. Henderson, I need you to understand that this countersuit means the case is going to be even more expensive and time-consuming than we originally thought. More expensive. Even though Karen was working on contingency, there were court costs, filing fees, and expert witness fees that someone had to pay up front. Money I didn't have. That's when the second miracle happened. I was sitting in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, trying to figure out how I was going to come up with $3,000 for a forensic accountant we needed to trace where my money had gone. When my doorbell rang, standing on my porch was a woman about my age, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from a lifetime of getting things done. "Are you Dorothy Henderson?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Eleanor Hutchinson. I saw your story on the news, and I'd like to talk to you about your lawsuit against your nephew." Eleanor Hutchinson, it turned out, was the widow of a man who'd made a fortune in construction before dying of a heart attack 3 years earlier. She'd been reading about elder financial abuse cases and looking for ways to use her resources to help other seniors fight back against family members who preyed on them. "I've been scammed, too," she told me over coffee in my kitchen. "Not by family, but by a financial advisor who convinced me to put $500,000 into investments that turned out to be worthless. I was lucky enough to have other resources to fall back on, but it made me realize how vulnerable we are as we get older. I'm not looking for charity, Mrs. Hutchinson. I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a partnership. I'll cover your legal costs, and in exchange, I want you to help me start a foundation that helps other elderly people fight back against financial abuse. We'll call it the Elder Justice Project. Why me?" Eleanor smiled. "Because you're not giving up. Most people in your situation would have accepted their losses and tried to move on with what they had left. But you're fighting, even when everyone tells you it's hopeless. That's exactly the kind of spirit this foundation needs." The Elder Justice Project became my new purpose in life. While Karen fought Bradley in court, Eleanor and I worked with other attorneys to help seniors who'd been victimized by family members, caregivers, and supposed professionals who'd stolen their life savings. We helped a widower in Coeur d'Alene whose son had emptied his checking account to buy drugs. We supported a grandmother in Missoula whose daughter-in-law had forged her signature to take out a reverse mortgage on her house. We connected a retired teacher in Boise with a lawyer who helped her recover money stolen by a financial planner she'd trusted for 15 years. Each case was heartbreaking, but each victory made me feel like my own loss had meaning beyond just my personal tragedy. Bradley had taken my money, but he'd inadvertently given me something more valuable. A mission that got me up every morning with purpose. The work also gave me strength for what came next in my own case. 18 months after we filed the lawsuit, Bradley's lawyers demanded that I sit for a deposition, a legal proceeding where they could question me under oath about my relationship with Bradley and my claims against him. "This is going to be brutal," Karen warned me. "They're going to try to make you look foolish, gullible, maybe even complicit in your own victimization. They'll ask deeply personal questions about your finances, your family relationships, and your mental state. Their goal is to make you so uncomfortable that you'll agree to drop the lawsuit." "Let them try," I said. At 79 years old, I don't embarrass easily. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room in downtown Seattle. Bradley was there with his 2 lawyers, refusing to make eye contact with me. I hadn't seen him since that confrontation in his apartment 2 years earlier, and I was shocked by how much he'd changed. He looked older, thinner, and defeated. Whatever he'd been doing with his life since he stole from me, it wasn't going well. For 6 hours, Bradley's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Vance, asked me questions designed to make me look like a foolish old woman who'd made bad financial decisions and was now looking for someone to blame. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "you've admitted that no one forced you to give my client money. You wrote the checks voluntarily, correct? I wrote the checks because he lied to me about what he was going to do with the money. But you're an intelligent woman. You managed your own finances for decades after your husband died. Didn't you think to ask for documentation of these investments before handing over such large sums?" I trusted him. He was my nephew. "So you're saying that you made the decision to invest without doing any due diligence? Without seeking independent financial advice? Without even asking to see the investment documents, because he was related to you? I'm saying he spent months building my trust, lying to me about his success, showing me fake returns on the first investment, and using my love for him against me. But ultimately, the decision to invest was yours, wasn't it?" That's when I understood what she was doing. She was trying to make me blame myself for Bradley's crimes, trying to convince me that being trusting was the same as being stupid, and that loving my family was a weakness that made me deserving of abuse. "Ms. Vance," I said, looking directly at Bradley for the first time that day, "let me ask you a question. If someone you loved and trusted came to you with what appeared to be a legitimate investment opportunity, wouldn't you be inclined to believe them? I'm asking the questions here, Mrs. Henderson, and I'm giving you an answer. What my nephew did to me wasn't just theft. It was a betrayal of the most fundamental bond between family members. He studied me for months, learned my weaknesses, and figured out exactly how to manipulate my emotions and my trust. That's not poor financial judgment on my part. That's criminal fraud on his part." I looked at Bradley again, and this time he looked back at me. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been shame in his eyes. "Bradley," I said, "even though the lawyers were telling me not to address him directly, you were the only family I had left who seemed to care about me. I would have given you anything you needed if you'd just been honest with me. Instead, you chose to lie, to steal, and to destroy the trust between us. That's not my fault. That's yours." He looked away, and I knew that whatever happened with the lawsuit, I'd already won something more important than money. I'd won back my sense of who I was, not a victim, but a survivor. Not a fool who'd been easily manipulated, but a woman who'd loved deeply and been betrayed by someone who didn't deserve that love. The deposition ended with Patricia Vance looking frustrated, and Bradley looking like he wanted to disappear into his chair. As we packed up our papers, Karen leaned over and whispered, "Mrs. Henderson, that was the best deposition I've ever seen from a plaintiff. You just won this case." She was right, but the victory would come at a cost I never could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, almost 3 years after Bradley had first knocked on my door with his investment schemes. I was in my kitchen, making coffee and preparing for another day at the Elder Justice Project, when Karen's voice came through the phone with news I'd been waiting to hear. "Mrs. Henderson, Bradley's lawyers want to settle." "For how much?" $200,000. Plus they'll pay our attorney's fees and court costs." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. $200,000 was 80% of what Bradley had stolen from me. More money than I'd ever expected to see again. "There's one condition," Karen continued. "They want a confidentiality agreement. You wouldn't be able to talk publicly about the case or Bradley's conduct. Absolutely not. I thought you'd say that. But Mrs. Henderson, I need you to consider this carefully. If we go to trial, we might win more money, but we also might win nothing. Juries are unpredictable, and Bradley's lawyers are going to paint him as a well-meaning nephew who made some poor investment decisions. This settlement guarantees you'll get most of your money back. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. No confidentiality agreement. If Bradley wants to settle, he can do it without trying to silence me. Other people need to know what he did, so they can protect themselves from men like him. They'll probably withdraw the settlement offer. Then we go to trial. But 3 days later, Bradley's lawyers called back with a new offer, the same $200,000, plus attorney's fees, with no confidentiality agreement. They knew what I knew, that their client was guilty, and that a jury would see that as clearly as I did. The settlement check arrived on a Thursday in April. $237,000, including the legal fees. I deposited it in the same First National Bank where I'd withdrawn Bradley's stolen money 4 years earlier. Jennifer, the teller who'd tried to talk me out of that first cash withdrawal, smiled when she processed the deposit. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so glad to see you getting some of your money back. I followed your story in the news. Thank you, honey, and thank you for trying to warn me all those years ago. I should have listened. Sometimes we have to learn the hard way that not everyone has good intentions, even when they're family, especially when they're family." That evening, I called Eleanor Hutchinson to tell her about the settlement. "Congratulations, Dorothy. What are you going to do now?" "Keep fighting. This settlement gives me the resources to expand the Elder Justice Project. We can help more people and take on more cases. Bradley might have won a battle, but he's not going to win the war." Over the next 2 years, the Elder Justice Project helped recover more than $8 million for elderly victims of financial abuse. We lobbied for stronger laws protecting seniors from family members who prey on their trust. We created educational programs teaching older adults how to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation. We turned my personal tragedy into a weapon for fighting back against everyone who thought elderly people were easy targets. But the most important thing I accomplished had nothing to do with money or justice or legal victories. I learned that at 81 years old, I was stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. The woman who'd been devastated by her nephew's betrayal, who'd felt helpless and stupid and ashamed, was gone. In her place was someone who understood that being victimized doesn't make you a victim unless you choose to stay one. I chose to fight, and in fighting, I discovered who I really was beneath all the roles I'd played. Wife, mother, aunt, elderly woman living alone. I was Dorothy Mae Henderson, and I was nobody's fool. Bradley never contacted me after the settlement. I heard through family friends that he'd moved back to Spokane, that he was working at a car dealership again, living in a small apartment, and driving an old truck. His reputation in our family was destroyed, his dreams of easy money crushed by the weight of his own greed and cowardice. I could have felt sorry for him. Part of me wanted to. But then I'd get a call from another elderly person who'd been scammed by their own child or grandchild, and I'd remember that Bradley had made his choice. He'd chosen to see my love as weakness and my trust as stupidity. He'd chosen to steal from the woman who would have given him anything he needed if he'd just asked honestly. Those were his choices, not mine. My choice was to turn the worst thing that ever happened to me into something that would help other people avoid the same fate. 3 months ago, I received a letter from a woman in Portland whose daughter had tried to con her out of her house using tactics almost identical to Bradley's. She'd recognized the manipulation because of an interview I'd given to a local newspaper about elder financial abuse. "Mrs. Henderson," she wrote, "your story saved my house and probably my life. Because I knew what to look for, I was able to stop my daughter before she could complete her scheme. Thank you for having the courage to speak out about what happened to you." That letter is framed on my kitchen wall now, right next to a photo of Frank and me on our wedding day. It reminds me every morning that pain can be transformed into purpose, that betrayal can become a source of strength, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what really matters. I'm 81 years old now. My hair is completely white, my hands are spotted with age, and my back aches when I spend too much time at the computer working on elder justice project cases. But I wake up every day with something I didn't have before Bradley stole from me. Absolute certainty about who I am and what I'm capable of. I trusted the wrong person, and it cost me nearly everything I'd worked my whole life to build. But in losing my money, I found my strength. In being betrayed by family, I created a new family of people dedicated to protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. Bradley took my savings, but he gave me something more valuable in return. The knowledge that I could survive anything, fight anyone, and win battles I never imagined I'd have to fight. At 81 years old, I finally know who Dorothy Mae Henderson really is. She's a woman you don't want to mess with. Thank you for listening to today's story from Granny Story Corner. Life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways, doesn't it? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more real-life tales that remind us of our shared humanity. Until next time, may your own story be filled with wisdom and love.